The father. The first treasure beneath the rubble. And the very first video that I've ever uploaded, the first chapter in this journey one could say, we tore the veil from truth itself and discovered that civilization cannot even begin without free speech. And the second one, talking about migration, something even more disturbing revealed itself. Something deeper. It is not just invasion, but disorientation. The ship on Theseus really showed us that we have no longer any idea of who we are, what we inherited, or why we should defend it at all. On top of this, we have also forgotten on what path we are even on, to name what it is that we are even doing. But in order to find our way back, we need to undergo the following journey. This video will be the first step of it. As we begin to trace back the ideas, the archetypes, the myth, the psyche of the Western civilization, to try and see if we can maybe rediscover and make sense of all of this madness, and also how to actually get out of it instead of just complaining about it. In my very last video, I included a critique of modern conservatism at the end. How it buys into the very same neoliberal paradigms that have led us to the current situation to begin with, despite trying their hardest to frame themselves as an actual counter-movement to the current state of affairs. It is this very video here and the following ones that will not just be a critique of this stance, it will actually be a direct answer to the missing cultural component of our civilization. It will be an alternative that can actually build something instead of attempting to frantically turn back time to whenever your childhood was just good enough. Thus we descend much further, because confusion is never really the root problem, it is but always a symptom of a missing axis. And beneath the rubble of modern Europe and its concrete abominations lies the very first, the most dangerous, and the most forbidden treasure of them all. Some hysterical outcry in the cultural zeitgeist may name him
patriarchy.
But it is in fact the father.
I was not born, I arrived like a blade buried in earth, called upward by the cry of men too long bowed. Before names, before thrones, before mercy learned who lies, there was the weight behind the wind. Before any place burned, there was me, the fire that was.
Chapter 1. Europe without an axis. The Orphaned civilization. A civilization without an axis cannot judge anything. In fact, we have even become so afraid of judgment at all that even the word carries a certain weight with it. But it is much too convenient if the word alone bears all the weight, isn't it? In truth, the weight is not just carried by those that are judged by it, but it is also carried primarily by those who have to live with our inability to judge anything at all. The vulnerable and the exposed. The few small things that we should have protected when we could. Just take a look at what we can no longer distinguish between properly on an institutional scale. The people fleeing from war. The people fleeing from genuine persecution. The people gaming the system. Or the people that demand submission in the name of a foreign god. To the modern bureaucratic European mind, these lives blur, and they actually have to blur, into one moral category. This is because they are of course processed through the very same filters. Forms, entitlements, humanitarian language, legal codes, and all of this jargon. As we all know by now, and had the ability to find out over the last 30+ years, this process doesn't work. And it doesn't work precisely because judgment is not just information. Judgment is a vertical act. It needs a before and an after, a higher and a lower. Everybody will be nodding their hands along when it comes to before and an after. Oh, but we do recoil. Even when I just say the word higher and lower. But it is a sense that some claims are rightful and others are parasitic. When this very axis breaks, this disappears the ability to even make the distinction. And without this distinction, all appeals feel equally sacred, if it is to the right institution, of course. Thus, every story sounds like a demand for compassion, and probably even is. There is no real hierarchy of meaning, only competing victimhoods. But when everything is treated as equally sacred, nothing is truly sacred anymore. Modern Europe is not the monster it's trying to run away from, it is but an orphan. A self-made orphan that does not know what it even is, it barely has a concept of what it lacks. Thus, instead of defending meaning or discovering it, it manages chaos, it shuffles papers and moves bodies around, adjusting rules to try and cope with a world that it no longer believes it has the right to judge. Chapter 2. The war that no longer lives in us. The caricatured alternative to all of this. Well, there is a sentence that sounds just about heroic enough to not be true. But yet it is said all the time and contains the mirror disease of the modern age. They died for an idea. They cared too much, and thus we have to care too little. This is how we speak today, as if men ran into machine gun fire, braced shield walls, or the pits of hell itself because of slogans. As if death could be negotiated with by abstractions and ideas discovered in a cozy library under candlelight. That's not how wars are actually fought. Despite what politicians want to tell you, no one truly dies heroically and willingly for an ism. Neither does one bleed for constitutions printed on paper. No one is rushing to drown in mud for a paragraph in a charter. All of this comes later and is reattributed after the fact. Even the names that we attach to the reasons, democracy, freedom, and nations, are not what the dying carry in their mouth. As when men met their end, they did not cry out the name of their system, the Führer, democracy, freedom. No, they cried for home, for their mothers.
Anybody who didn't go in was shot on sight for cowardice. We went over and we crawled. If you stood up, you were dead. And I came across a Cornishman. He was ripped from his shoulder to his stomach with shrapnel. His inside was out on the ground in a pool of blood. He said, "Shoot me." Before we could draw a revolver to shoot him, he was beyond all human aid. He died. In 30 seconds he died, and he just said one word, "Mother." And that haunted me all my life.
For the place where the road bends behind a hill. For the quiet and small street that smells like bread in the morning. For the small room in which their child sleeps. For the right of something small, fragile, and ordinary to continue existing without being erased or oppressed. What they defended wasn't really an idea, even though we hope it was. It was the right to remain unremarkable. The right for the small and the tiny to be beneath and far away from the great. The right for the local to endure beneath the violent sweep of history. Even the grand banners of war were, in the final moment, peeled away by this.
Out of the trench, there was about 4 or 5 Germans got out. And they didn't get out to run, they got out to fight. And one of them was coming towards us with a fixed bayonet. He couldn't have had any ammunition, or else he'd have shot us. As I say, I was a crack shot. I shot him in the shoulder. I couldn't kill him. That Cornishman's mother was in my brain. I thought, I can't kill him. He's somebody's son. He's probably got brothers and sisters. Maybe he's got a family to bring up. I can't kill him. I shall never forget it.
What remained was always intimate. Soil, memory, lineage, and the quiet permission to exist and to decide who you are and what this means for you. This is why modern Europe, the people and not the government, cannot imagine such sacrifice anymore, even though its leaders might attempt to invoke it. Every young man reflecting on a draft, especially for Ukraine for example, and how he might have to lay down his life for the current state of affairs, is silently abandoning the idea of the heroic defense of freedoms long encroached upon. That's exactly why Europe fails to inspire, because it no longer dares to speak in the language of home and belonging, the echoes of which are too traumatic to even bring up. It speaks instead in the language of systems. and these systems do not receive the dead. At best, they count them. We tell ourselves that earlier generations were just more ideological, backwards and barbarian. In truth, they were more rooted. We just forgot how to spot the difference. Our ancestors, however, committed their life to these causes because they were suspended inside of something older and greater than themselves. Not a theory or an idea, nor the conscious thought of it. But instead, it was a place.
I can see in my mind's eye those rows and rows of white stones of all the hundreds of my friends and everybody else that gave their lives for what? The country of today. No, I'm sorry. The sacrifice wasn't worth the result that it is now.
All of this is intrinsically understood by us all. It is why the talk alone of home and belonging, a place to be, something where you can feel to be welcome, makes all of our hearts a little heavier, and the hairs on our arms and backs stand up. It is exactly why the great J.R.R. Tolkien, someone that I will definitely come back to within the next few episodes, can show us this better than almost any political philosopher of our time. As the most truthful battle cry that he ever wrote wasn't for the West, for victory or for power, it was
for Frodo.
not just for a throne or a realm, but for a small bearer of an unbearable burden. For the vulnerable, the ordinary, for the one that should have been allowed to live quietly. That is what war reveals when all lies burn away in the harsh reality of the horror of it. Men don't really die at the end willingly for the great. They die and name the price themselves. Crying out for your mother or home is not just a wish, it is the understanding that you are the currency with which this is even possible. Any other good can never demand the price of your life, no matter how much someone wants to motivate you. And when a civilization forgets that, when it can no longer name the small place beyond the hill that is worth defending, when it gets drunk on great ideas, or numb with the absence of any, then it may still have armies, flags, and institutions, but it no longer has anything to fill them with, and thus no reason to stand for them. Chapter 3. The Sky Father, a North Star above history. Alright. We have seen how miserable the current state of affairs is, and its satirical counterpart isn't much better. Now what is it then that we are after? Properly naming it is actually impossible. Because if we want to understand what once orientated mankind, the very thing that judges us even if we try to turn it off, even if we only try to center it on us, then we must go back to a time before systems as we know them even existed, because it is the systemic spirit that corrupts these into lesser forms of the true idea. Thus before nations, law codes, democracy or fascism, before even the idea of politics itself as we think about it, we must go back to a world that did not yet argue about meaning, because meaning had not even been questioned. As far back as we can tell, the Proto-Indo-European peoples, the ancestors of virtually almost all of Western civilization, named the source of this order Deus Pater, the daylight father, the shining sky, the open above, the one who looks down from height. From him descend even verbally Zeus, Jupiter, Tyr, Tivats of the Germanic tribes, and so many more, maybe not even related in name but in function, as the All-Father. It is a mistake to imagine these figures as kings or as a patriarchal caricature of rulership. They were instead something far more oppressive. They were directions. The open sky above the world, light above chaos, order above instinct. The vertical call carved directly into reality and stone itself by our ancestors. The Sky Father was not a lawgiver in the modern sense. He was not a moral policeman, nor an ideological authority. He was the horizon. This is why all our heroes ride horses or grand chariots across the sky to pursue him. It is why our hair stands up on our neck when we think about the moon landing.
9. Ignition sequence start.
just a mere man riding a fiery chariot to this cold, abandoned rock, planting his flag in there and proclaiming in front of existence itself that he had been here.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But I get far too ahead of myself. That is maybe part of another story, some other time. What matters now, however, is the conceptual understanding that this is some higher value that could never be reached, but towards which everything that existed was silently aligned. This is the crucial, very little difference between the ancient and the modern mind. The ancient world did not treat preference as sovereign. It had to understand that there is something above it by necessity, something that they, and neither we, can name or grasp fully, but that calls for us. Meaning was thus not negotiated with existence, it was perceived. It is its contextualization into culture and mythos that enabled us to make the leap from animal to civilization. Back then, you didn't invent your own values, the world was far too costly for that luxury. You just were forced to orientate yourself to what forced you to do it. You had to hunt the animal, you had to gather the food, and you had to have the children. Unless you wanna grow old and die miserably alone and forgotten. This is why you had to orientate yourself toward all of this. And the sky is something that no one can really argue with. Everything is beneath it, and it could see all and delivered very harsh judgments. Droughts and storms, floods, all from above, all beyond reason or causality for our ancestors. Oh, but despite not understanding, we still looked for it. And out of the search for reason, we wrote stories. We painted our heroes and the stars. In fact, we still do it. It is why we looked at the night sky and dreamt, as we still do, of a better future. It is this force that commands us without speech to become more. And because this authority could never really be possessed, it could not be abused in the modern sense. No human could become the sky, and no man could claim to be that which was always above him. It is very much what modern people scarcely understand anymore, or want to. It is the very simple fact that the highest authority, however you might call it, wasn't ever really understood as a throne in the sky, an old man in a cloud. You only make this argument to belittle it, but instead it is a direction of ascent, not a caricatured ruler or patriarch, but a North Star. And because this North Star is exterior, unreachable, and impersonal, it prevented the most dangerous confusion of all, the one that we make pretty much daily. It is the confusion of man with the source of meaning itself. I just want to be happy, that's not what it's about. And that is exactly why, long before we ever were happy, long before ideologies and empires, humanity already lived inside a vertical structure of reality. As long as this structure was orientated towards the sky and not collapsed into human hands, order didn't really need to be enforced yet, because it enforced itself. It was simply obeyed, just how your body has to obey gravity. Of course, all of this is not literally applicable anymore today. It is maybe the oldest idea we ever had, and probably the most important. But it still needed a lot of refinement. Mishandling of these ideas, when the sky collapses into the world, when the North Star is dragged down into politics, when man claims to be what should always stand above him, then the horizon becomes a weapon. The ascent of it then becomes domination, but that story we will look at a bit later. For now, what matters is that we have recovered the understanding of the idea, at least. That before any real gods, we had a sky that summoned us. Before we had any doctrines of power written on parchment, we had height that measured us. And every step that mankind once took upward was taken in silent alignment, with and towards something that could never be owned, only followed. And with this, I say my farewell. I'll see you guys on my next entry, probably next week. In the meantime, feel free to check out my prior videos. They are a bit long, but they probably give you a solid foundation of where I come from. Thank you for your time.
I was there when we first rose, not to feed, no, but to stand tall and mighty are we few. I was the shape behind the oath, the voice behind law, not written but carved on bark, on bone, on flesh and stone. They crowned me I did not give life. I demanded it become worthy of my name.